I'd now like to introduce Laura Bellingham, who's, as you can see from the slide, the Assistant Director at the QAA. And Laura has been working with Simon to lead the development of the guidance document, the so-called reference point.
Thank you, Jim. I should say I'm not the Assistant Director of the QAA. I'm an Assistant Director. I'm not quite old enough to be the Assistant Director. And I'm in the Research Development and Partnerships group, as the slide said. So I'm not involved in the reviews. So those of you who've been on the receiving end, don't throw things at me. I'm nothing to do with the reviews side. But yes, so very happy to be here. And thank you to Jim for inviting me. I want to say something about QAA in brief, because I think some people you might know us well and some people you might not know us at all. So I'm going to say who we are and what we do and how we got involved in ESD, because that's not an area that's synonymous with the QAA. So I do want to say something about the context. And then the main reason that I think I've been invited is to talk about this draft consultation document that we've got out at the moment. Okay, so in real layman's terms, we're the closest you get to Ofsted, but for universities. But of course it operates differently because universities are independent and autonomous bodies. QAA has a very different relationship with them than Ofsted does with schools. But our raison d'etre is to look after academic standards and the quality of students' academic experiences. In doing so, we publish a suite of reference points. It used to be called the Academic Infrastructure. It's now called the UK Quality Code. And in there, you'd find guidance on admissions, on supporting learning and teaching, support for students with disabilities, the whole sort of student life cycle. You also find what we call a framework for higher education qualifications, so setting out what a master's degree is, a bachelor's degree, a PhD. And then, probably most relevant to some of the things I'm going to say today, we also publish a set of subject benchmark statements, and those set out what it means to have a degree in a particular subject area, so a degree in history, a degree in chemistry, engineering, the whole set of what we'd recognise as individual discipline areas. That's our framework, that's our UK Quality Code, and that's what QAA reviewers refer to when they go and visit and conduct their reviews. So that's, in a sense, the National Quality Assurance Architecture or framework. Now, the guidance that we're here to talk about today sits alongside that. It doesn't form an explicit part of the UK Quality Code. Whether that changes in the future, it depends on how the sector responds to and engages with the guidance. But at the moment, it's complementing it rather than forming an explicit part. Okay, so we conduct our reviews and then we publish the findings. I think I've probably said everything on there. Oh, the chapter on learning and teaching. Simon was right, it's chapter B3. In my next slide, I think I'll say something about context, but yes, so the chapter on learning and teaching refers explicitly to education for sustainable development. The context in which it does so is where it's talking about cross-cutting themes, so things that cut across discipline areas. That's new territory for QAA, and it's not easy. It's actually quite difficult, and that's also on my slides later. But that's where ESD is mentioned, so there's a mention of it in the chapter on learning and teaching, and then this new guidance will complement that and sit alongside it. Okay, so the context, how did we get involved? A few things collided at the same time, but in a very nice way. I led a piece of work that published last year on guidance for higher education providers on enterprise and entrepreneurship education. Now, there are parallels between these two areas. Enterprise and entrepreneurship education, again, cuts across discipline areas, so it doesn't lend itself well to a standalone subject benchmark statement because we don't have many degree programmes in this area. If you have any questions, by the way, just butt in. You won't throw me off course. Well, you might, but... So last year we published guidance on enterprise and entrepreneurship education. That was fairly new ground for us. I worked very closely with the chair of that piece of work, Professor Andy Penaluna from Swansea Met, a bit like Jim's being for us, a great pioneer and ambassador, and we really can't do these pieces of work without the experts. I should have declared at the start, I'm by no means an ESD expert. I'm an expert in the process maybe, but not the subject matter, so we need our subject matter experts. So that guidance came out. It's been well received, and we do hear from time to time how universities are engaging with it. It would be very nice if we could commission case studies at some point, but as usual, that depends on resources. Our Chief Executive, Anthony McLaren, who was at UCAS before he was with QAA, has a personal interest in this area. He worked with Forum for the Future when he was at UCAS, so he was already aware of the work in this area. And he agreed to chair the project board of a HEFCE-funded project that was led by the University of Gloucestershire, Daniela Tilbury and Alex Ryan. They're not here today, but I'm sure you've heard of them. That project came to a close, I hope I've got that right, in 2012. So that certainly left a legacy. As I say, Anthony's quite committed to this area. We also, colleagues were leading, as I said, the chapter of the Quality Code on Learning and Teaching, which now contains a reference to ESD. And then we also, I put this one at the end, specific to, QAA has an office in Glasgow, so specific to universities in Scotland, there is an enhancement theme running, Graduates for the 21st Century, and that's concerned with graduate attributes, so looking again across subject area, trying to almost benchmark or commit to paper what we think graduates should be coming out with by way of generic or key skills. So not to say you're an expert in engineering or your specific area, but what we might find in common, what is graduateness in effect. So all of these things came together. Daniela and Alex came across to meet with me and colleagues to sort of ask whether there's more QAA could be doing. And given we had already worked on the enterprise, we realised we could do a similar piece of work. So that's what brought us to where we are now. There's also, of course, a number of external drivers, apart from this, could you say, the moral imperatives, the greater good. If I said that outside of this audience as a QA representative, I wouldn't get very far. If I said to quality professionals, there's a moral imperative here, I'd probably have to leave the room. So I stick to these external drivers. These are safe for me. The HEFCE consultation, of course, QAA is funded in large part by HEFCE as well as universities themselves. There's a reference in the framework that Andrew's going to speak about, page 8 to 11 on ESD, and talks about the work that we've been doing. I'm aware of the HEA and the NUS surveys of student attitude, so a great driver. As Simon said, more and more now, coming right from the top, coming from the Minister and government views, students are up front and central now, more so than they used to be. So what students say they want from their education is a very strong driver. Employer and industry needs. Now, I'm hazy on the detail there. You might know the references stronger than I do, but certainly the employers have recognised that actually students do need these transferable skills more than just the subject knowledge. And then government, as we talked about. I put this slide in just to illustrate what I meant by graduates for the 21st century. So this is copied from that enhancement theme in Scotland. Probably some familiar themes there, although sustainable development isn't name-checked in that particular guise, it certainly comes through if we look at some of the ethical, social and professional understanding, lifelong learning, employability, global citizenship. So it's there. But what I was invited to talk about is this new guidance, and very much done in consultation. Jim chairs the expert group. We've also got Charlotte from the NUS on the group, and Simon is the co-facilitator from the HEA side. So Simon's in a way my partner in crime for this area. We started off by taking soft sounding as to whether this would be a good idea. So we asked people involved in the HEFCE-funded University of Gloucestershire project. When we're out and about, Simon and I were both sort of getting set of views on this. It seemed like it would be a good idea, so we convened an expert group. This is quite a tried and tested process for QAA. As we say, we don't write these things in-house because we don't have the subject knowledge. We need to bring experts together, facilitate that process, and then our reference points reflect that expertise back. Our in-house writer is here today, Rachel. So very importantly to say, we're not the authors. Rachel's not the author, she's a writer. She's reflecting what you as the experts tell us should be in there. And that's how things should operate, that's how they operate best. So the advisory group has met 3 times in 2013, and we're due to meet again in January 14 to consider the responses to the online consultation that's running right now. We also held a consultation workshop. Simon did the bulk of the work on that, but it was a jointly badged event on the 5th of November. We received a lot of feedback, didn't we, Jim? Fair to say. We're not scared of that, but we've got a great number of responses already coming through from that event, and we're expecting a lot more through the online consultation. So our work is not yet done. So I think we've got work to do when the consultation closes on all aspects of the document, but particularly I'll mention some of the crucial elements that are coming through. So what you'll see from that is we very much run a sort of open, consultative, representative process. It's not 1 or 2 people writing an academic essay on this subject. That wouldn't do at all, because this is a national reference point, practical guidance for 130, that's probably the wrong figure, but a great number of publicly funded and some private institutions. So we're aiming to facilitate rather than constrain innovation. It's not prescriptive. Universities do things differently for good reason, so it's not straitjacketing. That makes the task, again, quite hard, because we're trying to encompass a great range of views and a great range of ways of doing things. So what is the guidance not about? It's not about dictating practice. It's not about setting curricula or forcing change. Now, you don't have to agree with me on this. I remember at the consultation workshop a couple of weeks ago, I think one view at least was that we weren't going far enough, and that this is a educational change movement, transformative. Here's the window, let's grab it, let's go for it. My personal view is that sometimes a step change is not just easier, it can be more effective. So we're trying to bring about change in small ways, I suppose. An evolution, not a revolution, is the term that our chief executive uses. And you will know from the HEFCE perspective, same as me from the QAA perspective, if we're seen to encroach on curricula and tell universities what you should be teaching and how you should be teaching it, we come under fire, and that's quite right and proper. You're independent and autonomous organisations, so it's not about enforcing change. What it is about is offering something that can be helpful for those who've decided this is something worth doing, whether that's Joe Blogg's lecturer, programme leader, senior manager responsibility for learning and teaching. The document at the moment is trying to be all things to all people. We know we need to have a look at that in more detail. But certainly the idea is that this document will reflect a national consensus, or as close to it as we can get, which means that someone maybe new to the area will have something they can pick up that has the status of the HEA badge and the QAA badge and the expert group behind us, and that will be of practical help. Whether it may not just be people who are new to the area, it may be someone who knows what they're doing but wants to check in with what others are doing in the subject area. So it's about, and again, sorry if the terminology is QAA speak and not something that you would use, but for me it's about responding to contemporary influences, supporting HE providers in preparing graduates for the 21st century. So new ground, we may not get it perfectly right the first time, but we understand this is something worth doing. Why is it tricky? Because, as I say, it operates across disciplines. I used to lead QAA's work on subject benchmarking. I thought that was hard. This is even harder. So having sat down with engineers, with English literature experts, etc., that was hard enough, reaching a consensus. Dealing with something that spans discipline areas is really tough. But we're having a go. And it should serve, as I said earlier, to enable rather to constrain innovation. It's not about dictating pedagogy, classroom practice. It's more an outcomes-based framework, and I wouldn't mind at all if we have some discussion on that at some point today, because again, that seemed to be a new concept to some people at the workshop consultation workshop a couple of weeks ago. So what's made up in the draft? We've got an introduction, a scene setting, and then we've got what I would call the meat of the document, the graduate outcomes. So what, if this is worth doing, what's the answer to the so what question? What looks different? What are students able to do that they're not able to do if you didn't work with them in this way? So it's about knowledge and understanding, skills and attributes. Now, I don't think, the more I'm learning, that framework fits perfectly to this area, because a lot is around values and behaviours. So we're using the term attributes, but I am aware that that's a potential area of debate there. I've put in the block there sustainability literacy, and it seems to me that nothing is uncontended in this area, so I know that that is also a contentious term. A few years ago, Forum for the Future came to QAA, and I was actually part of a cross-sector project group then. They were very wedded to this term, so it's probably stuck in my mind. But this is what we're talking about. What students actually know, understand, they're able to do. But there is also a section on delivery, what I'd call delivery, teaching, learning and assessment. And it may be that we need, in the final version, I know Jim and I have talked about this, and Simon too, to marry those two up a bit. Okay. We've managed to come up with a definition. We say at the moment education for sustainable development means enabling students to develop the knowledge and understanding, skills and attributes needed to work and live in a way, it's a mouthful, that safeguards environmental, social and economic well-being, both in the present and for future generations. And you may have your views whether we've got that right or not, and that's part of the reason we go to consultation. It casts the net wider than the expert group that got us this far. Key themes. Now, I remember in one of our meetings we spent a morning coming up with these, and what we were trying to do was to see whether we could pin it down. If a real lay person says, well, what is this? I don't get this. Is this tree hugging? Is this recycling? We wanted to be able to say what it was, and this is as far as we got, and again, you might have your own views. Citizenship, environmental stewardship, social justice and equity. Ethics I've put in brackets because that came through at the consultation event. Whether it then has a place in the final version we need to talk about. Development of a future-facing outlook, recognition of consequences of actions and ensuring sustainable futures. That's what we've got so far as the key themes. I didn't know whether to include this slide or not. This is almost a personal view, so don't quote me. It's not a QAA view. Definitions. You might think that's the hardest part. It's not for me. That's one of the easiest parts, actually. I understand that the experts in the room spend a great amount of time defining what this is and what we mean by this. Now, I'm not too worried about what the final definition looks like. So long as we arrive on one and we communicate it clearly and we can use it, I'm okay with that. What we don't want to do is to publish a document that ends up looking like an academic essay that is going round and round the debates that you've been round, but that won't help anyone, because if you think about the quality professional in the university whose attention hasn't been drawn to this area before, they want something clear and succinct. So for me, I'd rather we not get too hung up, although we want to, of course, get it as right as possible. Audience, that's slightly hard. All of QAA's publications, in a way, are trying to be all things to all people, because all sorts of people pick them up and look at them. We know that senior people in institutions do, because they don't want their staff to miss anything that comes through from the QAA office. But we are also trying to offer something practically, so that would be Joe Boggs' lecturer or students or people that really want to engage with this on the ground. So we might need to look again at how we introduce the document and just be a little bit clearer. Even if we are saying this is going to remain all things to all people, we might just need to be a bit clearer on the audience. Language is also slightly hard. Interestingly, we had some people saying it was too academic, the language at the consultation event. Some people saying we should dress it up, we should jazzy it up, make it a bit more interesting. Now again, that's tricky ground, because QAA is QAA. Those of you who know our documents will know they're not jazzy as such. So it's, in a way, our job is harnessing the expertise, but getting it into a language that the QAA audience will be able to engage with. Because, and again, I'm sorry if you don't agree with me, if we go out and it's something that talks about educational change movement, this big, scary new beast, you'll lose people, you'll turn people off, in my view. But the language does, of course, have to be clear and it has to be accessible. People have to be able to use it. Reaching a consensus, that's quite hard. Of all the groups I've sat with over the years, only architecture probably parallels this one for difficulty, and that's mainly because they've got regulatory and professional bodies all vying for territory and gets a bit hairy. This one's quite hard. I've learnt that we've got 3 pillars, and at the moment we've had the view that we're coming through too strongly with the environmental in the draft, so we may need to adjust the balance there. Economic and social, I knew it really. But again, that's probably more important than the definitions. We do need to reach as much of a consensus as we can because we don't want to leave out chunks of practice. We won't please everyone. That's impossible because of the great diversity of the sector and practitioners' views within the sector. But we do want to get as close to a consensus as we can. Okay. Now, ideology. That one for me has been really hard. I don't think I realised coming into the process the particular ideology. And by that I mean, from a sort of outsider looking in, the document as I've described it, the outcomes-based framework, as I say, some people don't, I think, agree with that. They feel that this is about a way of teaching, it's transforming education. Now that's difficult for a body like QAA to go forth and say, you need to rethink the way you teach your undergraduates. So I think trying to steer it more towards an outcomes-based framework is not an unhelpful move, but quite willing to hear views on that. Hopefully I'm at the end. Yes. Okay, so the consultation's open right now. Do go on and have a look at the full draft. There's an online survey, and if you complete it by the 3rd of January, we'll be able to take your views into account. Thank you.